anxiety. So why should you even bother to take questions, to respond and speak extemporaneously, wherever that might be? Well, first of all, people have come to expect it. They expect that you're going to state your opinions, that you're going to contribute ideas in a meeting, that you're going to respond to their questions in the hallway. And if you're speaking before a group, it's their chance to get you to meet the press, so to speak, particularly on controversial issues. But responding well to questions, speaking off the cuff, actually benefits you personally, because questions provide feedback on how your message or your idea was received, and responding to questions gives you the chance to clear up any previous misunderstandings. And another benefit is that your answers show that you care about individuals' needs and their understanding. You're taking the time to respond to questions indicates that you genuinely are interested, that they know what you want to do or what you're thinking, and you want to give value to them. So in responding to questions and speaking off the cuff, you can be spontaneous and witty. In fact, nothing reveals your depth of knowledge, credibility, and actual communication skills quite as impressively as unrehearsed comments and answers to unplanned questions. So let's get specific then about how you do actually think on your feet. I want to give you an acronym that you can use in those spontaneous situations. We call it the SEER format. S-E-E-R. That's a trademarked model that we use in our presentation courses for corporate clients. Let me tell you what that stands for. The S, the first segment of your answer, is a summary, a one-sentence statement of your position on an issue, or your idea, or your goal, or vision, or plan, or whatever. The S, one-sentence statement. And then the second part of your response, the E, elaborate. Go back and fill in the gaps. The who, what, when, where, why, how, what data supports what you're saying. What are your reasons for doing something? And then the third segment, E, example. Give a concrete, specific illustration that will help clarify and make your key points more memorable. You would start at something like, you could actually use the words for example to transition. You might say, for example, last week I was talking to Joe Schmo in our New Orleans office, and he said, and then restate, restate in a sentence what your key point or idea or message or plan or decision is. You can actually use the first words that you started with when you made your overview statement, or you can come back and paraphrase. Let me give you a couple of examples of how this works. Let's say that somebody's asked me the question, do you think leasing more space in this building will solve our overcrowded conditions permanently? If I'm going to use the SEER response, I might respond like this. S, no, I don't think leasing more space here is a permanent solution. And then I would elaborate. The available space is not suitable for kinds of shelvings that we want to install. And for another thing, the extra space doesn't open to the outside hallway. Therefore, the traffic to the registration desk will still create peak hour waiting lines. And neither will the extra space accommodate those additional 200 or so visitors we expect during the spring. That's the elaboration. Then I would transition into E, the second E, a concrete example. You know, if you'll remember, we tried unsuccessfully to alter the traffic pattern 2 years ago by leasing more space down on the first floor. People just wouldn't walk to the end of the hall to take an alternate route. You remember Frank Tanner's comment about his people not having enough time to reach the coffee machine in 15 minutes, much less take a break once they got there. So, and then I move into my restatement, wrap up. So, no, I don't consider leasing more space in this building a permanent solution to the overcrowded conditions. You see how that works? Let me give you one other example here. Let's say someone says to me, a customer maybe catches me in the parking lot and says, does your company really care about the small customer? If I were going to use the SEER response, I might say, yes, we most definitely do care about our small customers. They keep us in business. In fact, 70% of our volume comes from the accounts we've labeled small business. I'd rather have 100 customers doing $50 to $75 a month with us than one customer who does $500,000 a month. That's our philosophy. we think we can get a broader perspective on the industry dealing with the variety of smaller businesses. We even print a catalog just for small businesses, showing our products and services geared for their specific uses. They also have their own 800 number for telephone support. Just last week, an operations vice president for one of our accounts told me that because we'd learned so much about the account's business by selling to them, they've decided to use us on a consulting basis instead of hiring a permanent purchasing agent. In other words, we'll be placing their orders for related products with their other vendors. It's a real partnership. We'd like to do that with all of our customers. So, yes, we do care about the small customer. Well, that's the second example. You can see how it flows. So how does this seer model, the one that we use, how does that sync with what Aristotle insisted about being credible? Well, Aristotle had three things to say about being credible. First, logic. He mentioned that you have to reach people with the concrete facts, reasons, support, data for what you want to say. Now, people don't always make decisions based on logic, but they like to think they do. And that's where the elaboration part of the seer format comes in. People understand and they want those reasons. Aristotle said the second thing you need to be persuasive and credible is emotion. You have to touch people emotionally. Now, I don't mean ha-ha, laugh, cry kind of emotion, but I mean they have to understand your answer, your opinion, your idea can't be just a theoretical something. They have to see how they react or how they relate to that idea in a concrete, specific situation. So that's where the second E in the seer format comes in. You give them an example, an illustration that they can identify with and understand. And then Aristotle said the third thing that you need to be credible and persuasive, he used three terms for this: character, integrity, trustworthiness. Now you may look at that seer format and think, what does that have to do with having character or integrity? You see, simply the fact that you start out with a concrete, one sentence, easy to understand summary answer, and then you go back at the end and close with a restatement in one sentence of concrete answer. It creates the impression that you do intend to be clear, unlike some of those impressions created when you watch the press conference and a politician is responding to the press and they get a question and talk for 5 minutes, and when they finish, you still don't know if they said yes or no. You still don't know if they're going to vote for the legislation or against. That only causes people to doubt their intentions, that they actually wanted to be clear. Now, obviously, when you use this format, it doesn't mean that you have to have a yes or no answer at the beginning. Your summary statement might be, I don't know. And then you might elaborate on why you feel ambivalent about the issue. And then you might give a concrete example that causes you concern and is a prime example of why you can't decide which side of the fence you're on. And then you come back and restate in a sentence, I don't know. But that is still a credible answer, because your audience knows when they walk away from that conversation or walk away from that meeting that you have not taken a position, that you are still considering your position. This format makes it much easier for you to think on your feet in just those typical, ordinary situations. It gives you structure for responding to others and stating your opinions in a concise way that will ensure maximum impact and recall. And then, of course, there are always just general tips that you want to keep in mind when you're responding off the cuff. Whether talking to a business audience or talking to your teen about a choice of colleges, you always need to prepare. Now, that's strange for some people because they think they can't compare or can't prepare for off-the-cuff comments. But audience analysis is the first step in preparing any kind of presentation, whether it's prepared or off-the-cuff. And that prep should always include considering the questions that a person or a group will have about your idea, your information, or any opposing viewpoints. You may choose to avoid a certain issue during your prepared remarks on the off chance that it won't surface as a question, but don't count on it. Instead, anticipate and prepare for questions or challenges to your ideas. And actually, when you don't get questions, let's say you're speaking in a meeting, you actually want to encourage them. Don't assume that